Do you ever sit around a table full of family members that are close to you and listen to them tell about their past? Do they ever tell you about the stories of adventures as kids and young adults, or the dangerous, funny, and even embarrassing things they did back in the day, as they would say? Swamp Gravy is just that. It's a bunch of volunteers getting together to tell the stories of the local community, hoping that everyone who comes in the doors can leave with a little more than they came with. Swamp Gravy shows us all how important it is to be a part of our local communities. There are so many interesting things that we can learn about each other's walks of life and history. I began performing in Swamp Gravy during the spring season of 2014. Going in, I really didn't know what it would be like, but I've learned to love it, and it's now my second home. Today, I would like to discuss the Swamp Gravy dish, the history of Swamp Gravy, and the community the show truly brings together. Let's begin by discussing what Swamp Gravy really is and how it relates to the play. As some of you may or may not know, Swamp Gravy is a dish made up of a little bit of everything. The recipe was concocted on the banks of Spring Creek in Miller County, Georgia, and some fishermen were having a fish fry, but they realized they didn't have anything to go with the fish. And everyone from South Georgia knows that you simply can't eat fish by itself. They had to come up with something from what they had, so they took some fish drippings, which is basically just the fat and the grease left over from after frying the fish. Then they added whatever they could find to the mix, like tomatoes, corn, potatoes, onions, and whatever else they could find lying around to throw in there. Then they mixed it all up into a stew, and a local dish was born. Now you may be asking yourself, what on earth does a stew have to do with a play? Well, it's a completely logical question. However, the two have much more in common than one would assume. Like the local dish, the play is a mixture of many different stories, gathered from the local community, all mixed into one big production called Swamp Gravy. The show always begins with a local song, written and known as the storytelling song. The song emphasizes how the play is truly a mixture of stories, with one of its lines that say, "We'll put 'em all together and spice 'em all up, and we'll have a storytelling time." Now that we've discussed how Swamp Gravy got its name, let's talk about the actual history of the show itself. The origins of Swamp Gravy can be traced all the way back to the New York Conference in 1990. Here, Joy Jinks, longtime resident of Miller County, met Richard Gere, a doctoral student in performance studies at Northwestern University. According to the Georgia Encyclopedia, in quote, Jinks expressed her concern about Miller County's economic decline and the growing number of Southwest Georgia youths who left the region after graduation. End quote. Jinks then proposed her idea about possibly starting a play in Colquitt in an attempt to revive the dwindling county, and Gere suggested that they would work together to create a play centered around stories of Miller County. The play officially kicked off in the fall of 1992 with a cast of local volunteers. After much success in 1993, Swamp Gravy received the 1994 Cultural Olympiad Award in Atlanta and was later performed there during the 1996 Olympic Games. The play would also go on to be performed at the Kennedy Center in Washington, D.C. that year. Swamp Gravy has called Cotton Hall Theater its home since 1994. The building is actually an old cotton warehouse that was renovated into a theater specifically for Swamp Gravy. Since the beginning of its productions, Cotton Hall Theater has actually birthed many other types of productions, including things like Mayhaw Christmas, an annual spring show, youth summer productions, and many, many more. Cotton Hall Theater houses many opportunities for the local community to get involved for free. Like I said, the general intent for Swamp Gravy was to revive a local community, and the show has done just that. According to Kate Willis, the director of Swamp Gravy, for the past 10 years, the show has brought significant life to the town that was once dwindling away. She says, in quote, "As for the impact, it has been significant. Tourism is the driving economic force for Miller County, and at one time, the Arts Council, which funds Swamp Gravy, was the third largest private employer in the county," end quote. The show has drawn people from all over 50 states and all 7 different countries to the small town of Colquitt, Georgia. Since we've discussed the history of the show, let's now discuss the community that brings the show together. Some people would argue that Swamp Gravy is just a play, but to the people involved, it is a family that is inside the walls of Cotton Hall Theater. It is so much more than that. Kate Willis sums up the impact of Swamp Gravy by saying, in quote, "I have seen people finally able to come to their terms with their past and seeing their stories on stage and knowing that they are not alone with the demons they fight. I have seen people who are emotionally isolated find their voice and their tribe. I have seen the most unlikely of people become fast friends, and I personally found the love of my life, and found myself shoved headlong out of my comfort zone into things I never thought I was capable of doing. I've seen my share of people come in thinking that it was all about them, but they aren't the ones that stick. Swamp Gravy isn't about the part, the solo, or even the spotlight. It's about being a part of something that is bigger than you, about taking pride in your community, and doing whatever you can to make it the best that it can be. Now, I'm not from around here, but here I have found my home, and I am fiercely proud of it, and of Swamp Gravy, and of the people who make it great." End quote. The cast of Swamp Gravy is literally like one big family, and I am so privileged to be able to call myself a part of that family. Swamp Gravy has changed my life and will continue to change it. It is the place that I call home. It's where I met my best friends and where I found acceptance when no one else was willing to accept. I, as well as so many others, am so grateful for not just a theater, but also a place I can call home. There are so many different ways for people to become involved in Swamp Gravy. According to Michelle Pierce, end quote, actors can participate in Swamp Gravy in two ways, either as part of the group scenes or, for those willing to make a greater time commitment, in a major role, which is double cast, end quote. With a stage and a few volunteers, the possibility for community building are absolutely endless. In conclusion, Swamp Gravy looks like a simple play on paper, but in reality, it's helped to bind a small rural community together for 24 years straight. We have discussed several aspects about Georgia's official folklife play, including how it got its name, its history, and the effect it's had on the local community. A small play that takes place in a town with approximately 2,000 residents may not have an effect on you. However, the importance of Swamp Gravy to Colquitt, Georgia, shows how truly important community is. It shows how vital it is to take pride in our history and the legacies left behind many others before us. It's things like that that help shape us into who we are and what we can accomplish. So next time your grandparents tell you a story they've told you 100 times, listen with intent. One day that history will be yours and you can learn from it. Swamp Gravy just kicked off a brand new production called Home, written by our very own assistant director, Will Murdoch. Get your tickets online at swampgravy.com.